The center is the customer. They're the ones who are paying for everything.
I just saw this as, oh my God, this is like my chance.
$250,000. It was almost surreal.
You can't just cut out one person in the supply chain in order to solve the problem.
Those are the kind of people you want. You respect them, their integrity, their intelligence, their ability, their can-do attitude, hard work.
Welcome to the Fall 2016 UCSB Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm John Greathouse, and with us tonight is Jason Droege with Uber. Jason is the head of Uber Everything, which I think is the best title I've ever heard for anybody in the world. I'm head of Uber Everything. He's focused on taking Uber's extensive logistics skills. I mean, obviously Uber's very good at taking cars and people and all over the world, mapping those to the right destination at the right time. He's taking that core competency and he's applying it into a number of different fields. You guys have heard of Uber Rush and Uber Eats. Those are just two of some of the endeavors that Jason's team is working on. They've rolled these new solutions out to over 25 cities in 6 countries and on 4 continents. So you can just imagine the scope of Jason's day when he's talking to people all over the world about rolling out these new initiatives, some of which we know about, some of which we don't, that are still in the works. It's great that Jason works at Uber. It's a high-profile company. It's fun, and we're going to learn some interesting things about it today. But Jason is a serial entrepreneur. Jason has been an entrepreneur since he was your age, since he was in college. He co-founded Scour, which is the first multimedia video search engine on the internet in 1997. I think I was 18 or 16, I think, at the time. At Scour, he was responsible for product development and business development. They grew that company into 1 million daily active users. So think about the early days of the internet. There weren't that many people on the internet, period, and they had 1 million a day coming for video. So think about how many people could actually access video in a narrowband world in the late 90s. So they had a huge percentage of the total population back then. They grew the company to 65 employees, and it was the #1 search engine in 1999. It was later acquired by Centerspan, and we'll talk a little bit about how that exit came about. Jason left Scour after the acquisition. He started a company called Back Nine Golf Company. I think it's one of the coolest companies ever. It was a great business. It was a great, after all of the chaos and high-profile nature of Scour, he started a business which was essentially the Kelley Blue Book for golf equipment. So he had over 500 retail establishments all over the country signed up, and they were buying and selling used golf equipment. And he moved on in 2004. The company was still running. It was still an effective company, but Jason got it to the point where he was able to move on. He joined SipPhone in 2004. Later, it was known as Gizmo 5 Technologies. He became the president of that company, grew it from 4 to 35 employees, and when he left in 2008, there was over 6 million users. Gizmo 5 was the leading competitor in VoIP to Skype at the time, and Google acquired the company in 2009. Jason's got a pretty good track record, in case you're following along. Jason is a proud product of the UC system. Although he's not a gaucho, he did go to UCLA. Let's give him a warm welcome. Woo!
Thanks. Great to almost be there. Sorry I couldn't be there in person.
Well, listen, we appreciate you making the time. We know your day is pretty hectic, and you've got a vibrant young family as well. So no worries. We appreciate it. So Jason, as I was saying in that introduction, I do think you're sort of the quintessential serial entrepreneur. I don't know that you've ever had more than a weekend maybe off in between your various ventures, and we're going to talk about a bunch of them. Was that the pattern when you were growing up as a child? Were you always engaged in multiple things, or was this something that really manifested itself later?
Yeah, so I think, I suppose entrepreneurs all come from different backgrounds, like in different interests. For me, like I've always been super curious. And I think as a kid, if I had to be reflective and talk about myself in my childhood, it's kind of weird, but if you go back, I guess the common thread is I always just kind of did whatever I was most interested in, and I was super curious. And so it wasn't always about money. It was more around the adventure of I wonder if I can do this. And then I did this, and then I wonder if I could do that, and then I failed, and then I wonder if I could do this, and those things, weren't always related to business. I didn't have a concept of wanting to be an entrepreneur until we started Scour. And very early on, I think it was more around like, I did do some things that taught me business. Like I used to trade business, like baseball cards for profit when I was like 9 or 10 years old to like make some spare cash for like, I don't know, whatever you make spare money for, then candy or Great America, like season pass, or, I actually did pretty well at that, but that's a dangerous game to get into. But I think like a common thread among a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, is just like you see a world or like maybe a problem that can be solved and like wonder why it hasn't been solved. And then there's usually a lot of people telling you like, oh, well, it's because business, it hasn't been solved for like these myriad of reasons and it probably won't be solved. And then you just kind of stir on the problem for a little bit and you're like, I still don't understand why it can't be solved.
Right.
And then you start taking steps toward it and then you realize that like the people around you might not know what they're talking about. And you start seeing a solution where other people maybe haven't. And you fail a lot. You get a lot of things wrong, but I think that that's a pretty common trait among a lot of entrepreneurial people is they're not really guided by the crowd. And they get a lot of enjoyment around like, maybe seeing things or figuring things out that other people haven't.
Well, a lot of it's timing too, right? So something that was impossible or impractical, 5, 6, 7 years ago can suddenly be possible. And those same people that they're sort of steeped in that world of yesterday. I mean, Uber's a great example. Without the smartphone and all that connectivity, I think that's one of the things I missed. And when I looked at the opportunity, it was just, yes, wealthy people in Silicon Valley have iPhones, but not, back then a lot of people didn't have them. But the rate of adoption, as we all know, was astronomical. So I think it's that ability to not just look at the today, certainly don't worry too much about yesterday, be able to look into the future, but not too far. Because if you look in too far, then you're going to fail there too. It's a sweet spot.
Yeah, I think you have to identify the things that are on linear trajectories and the things that are on exponential trajectories. Like that, as I've, in the past 4 or 5 years of like just becoming more mature at identifying opportunities, I think that's like a very important distinction. And that was the smartphone thing. Every analyst at the time said it was going to be this linear curve, and then like they were all wrong. It was this exponential curve, and that changed the game.
Right. Let's go way back then to college. Many people watching this at home are, in their 20s. Certainly in this room, we have a bunch of college students. So you started Scour. I think a lot of people, maybe younger people, don't realize that it was a precursor to Napster. Like Sean Fanning actually said, Scour was one of my inspirations, and he started Napster 18 months after you guys were at it. Tell me a little bit about that experience. What was it like to be in the 1.0 sort of internet mania, and then go ahead and tell us what ended up happening in that business and what lessons you took away from it.
Yeah, so that started in the dorms at UCLA. And when you speak about like right time, right place, right circumstances, like UCLA actually had a really robust internal network and like pretty robust internet connection to the outside world. Like back then, it was like 100 megabit connection into the university, which back then was a lot of bandwidth. And so one of my friends basically built a search engine that searched local dorm networks for Windows file shares. So whereas most search engines spider the internet, he noticed that in Windows 95, people were publicly sharing a bunch of documents, but there was and with no password. So they were publicly sharing it with their friends. He actually built a little spider that went around and said, oh, what's at UCLA? And he found a bunch of interesting things that were being publicly shared. A lot of music, of course. And this is back before MP3s were really known to be, a thing. A lot of video documents, et cetera. And if you tried to download multimedia at the time, you usually had to go to an FTP site, and no one in the room probably would remember this. FTP sites are so old, but you would have to upload 2 files for every file that you downloaded, and these FTP sites were run out of Norway or something, and it was super hard to get access to this content. And so we figured out a way to provide people access to this content who all happen to be on broadband. Like the UC system was a huge initial user of Scour. So we actually started in the dorms. We did a lot of irreverent things, which I think is a pretty consistent theme throughout my career. Like our first URL was scour.cs.ucla.edu. UCLA did not know about this, because one of the co-founders was a systems administrator at the computer science department. The first server was in a dorm room. So literally there was like a computer in a dorm room that was like radiating heat, 24 hours a day with like the hard drive grinding as people were like using this service. And so it was just like a really interesting, like experimental time, like in the internet. You read about, Yahoo going public, and, I'm not even sure we knew what we were living at the time, but it was definitely everything in hindsight is like, oh, wow, the internet 1.0. But at the time we were just like, whoa,
Right.
like we're breaking the rules, but are we? Not really sure. And so that was kind of a fun challenge. But it grew. The service wasn't like as reliable as you would want. It grew, got super popular, relatively speaking. Napster came along and actually made what we were doing actually a bit more robust, like it was a more reliable service. And they started to pass us, and then we built a file exchange that did audio, video, and images. And then, we were basically the number 2 player with, as you stated, like at our peak around a million customers or a million users a day. And just stop me if I'm being long-winded here, but like, at some point, we raised money, and that's a story in and of itself of like persistence and like learning about business, maybe some of the wrong lessons early on, because we raised it from some Hollywood guys. Apologies to anyone in the room whose parents or families in the entertainment industry, but it's very, I'll just put it this way, it's very different than raising money from technology VCs.
Well, give us a feel for what were the terms of that money. So this is circa 97, 98.
Yeah. So they took half the company for $4 million. We were all like 20 years old, 19, 20, 21.
Right.
There weren't like crazy liquidation preferences in the first round. Like it wasn't that hairy of a deal. It was just the guys we were dealing with were hairy.
Yep.
And they were just tough business people, right? And they like really pushed us on terms. They tried a bunch of stuff.
Right.
So that was the state of things. I mean, giving away half your company is not something you should just automatically do. I think we were in a position where we saw value in the connections that they could potentially have in Hollywood, because our ultimate vision wasn't to build a search engine where people found MP3s and illicit videos and things like that. It was, hey, there's this revolution that's happening in content, and we didn't know anything about timing. We just saw all this usage. So maybe like we can, we can actually like sell content.
Right.
Through this platform. And this is kind of a way, sort of free way to get users and then convert them later. Obviously that was a bit naive at the time, considering how long it actually took after 1999, 2000
Right.
for that actually to become legal.
Well, when you think about YouTube, right, they were 5 years or so after you, and they were able to weather the same storm that you had to weather, which was all the big content owners coming after you with their lawyers, and they were able to do that handoff to Google and make that a successful exit, whereas you guys were just a little too early. People just hadn't figured it out. There was no comfort on rights and how do we do digital rights, and it was all about shutting everything down. So like we said at the outset, timing is everything, right? You were a pioneer, you got the arrows in your back, and some of the folks that came on later were able to benefit from that. What some people may not know is Travis, the founder of Uber, actually worked at Scour, and you guys were able to work together. So I kind of have a 2-part question, and then I'm going to go to the first student question. If you want to, what can you tell us about Travis at the time? Did you see characteristics in the way he approached problems that you've now, have manifested itself when he started Uber? And secondly, what characteristics do you look for when you're out there talking to a young person? So somebody might be their first career opportunity. I know you're very senior. You're probably not talking to a lot of young people now, but when you do hire people that are at the front end of their careers, what are you looking for? So Travis, his characteristics and qualities that were entrepreneurial, and then young people.
Yeah, so, ever since Uber, it's kind of funny, I've known Travis for so long, everyone asks me like, what was he like?
Before, right.
And it's like, look, Travis from like the moment that I met him is like probably the most competitive person I know. He's just, he's also one of the most focused people I've ever met. And you can see that throughout his career. Once he gets his mindset on a problem, he is just incredibly persistent about doing what it takes to solve the problem when he thinks he's right.
Yep.
And I think that's why that's one of the main reasons why Uber is what it is. Sure, timing and these other things, but given the regulatory and environment, it took someone with that laser focus and that dedication to actually show the world like this is a better way. It's also safe. Blah blah blah.
Yep.
So I think those things from the very beginning. He's also, one thing he's also very good at is like preparing for like preparing to win. Like there's a saying that I'm going to butcher, which is like everyone wants to win, but nobody wants to prepare.
Yep.
He's excellent at preparing. Like he thinks through every single, like if he's going into a fundraising meeting or important business meeting, he thinks of like 20 different ways it can go, like has contingency plans in his head of like where he's going to take the conversation if it goes down those paths. So he's constantly prepared to handle a situation just to make sure that it goes smoothly. So that's what I'll say about Travis.
Yep.
And then the second part of the question was around.
So what do you look for with young people when you're interviewing them?
Yeah, sure. So I actually do work with a lot of pretty young people. Like my team I have people that are, maybe not fresh out of college, although we do have some of those. 25 to 28, I have managers on my team in that age range.
Sure.
Uber has been, I'm very lucky to work here because there's a lot of maybe people early in their career who are exceptionally high aptitude. Mm-hmm. So what I tend to look for is like, one, do you care? Like, do you like genuinely care about your job, or are you here to like make money? Like, are you here to build? Like, is that what fascinates you? Or is it like, well, I'll get this job and then I'll go to the next job and then my career will like progress.
So
those people are terrible.
So I know you have more than that, but let me stop you for a second. So what's a good example of someone who showed that to you? How did they show that to you?
Usually people who are really good at problem solving, like even in real time, tend to be builders. And that's like a signal that, because if I ask you a hard question, like how much should you pay for a customer, like for a business? Hard, nebulous question, especially in the early stage. If you are the kind of person who's thought about these things or thought about how to build a business, like that shows up in your answer, because you're like, well, there's no perfect answer, but I would bound it this way and I would think of it this way. And you can hear the passion in their voice about the problem solving. And people who like to solve problems also tend to like to put those things into like, make them real. And then they get annoyed whenever they're wrong and they constantly tweak. So like, I'd say that's one. Two is like, it's just amazing. Like, I'm trying to think of like a good example. I probably should have read through all these questions and thought of this, but you can almost see it in their like lives, right? Like, maybe not fresh out of college, but like into their career, if they're flipping between jobs, that's a pretty bad sign that they want to build, because to build things, it can take a number of years to build stuff. They tend to have examples of like, that's like really fingertippy of things that they've overcome in their career, or like forget their career. Let's say you're fresh out of college, you don't have a career, just in your life.
Right.
Like one of the best answers I heard to what's the hardest problem you ever solved, which is one of the questions I ask in every interview, was about someone who actually had like a fake leg or something like that, and had to overcome all this adversity in high school socially, and they had like details about what they had to fight through and like how they felt and the personal struggle. Like that stuff, like fighters are hard to find, and like there's personal life examples as well as professional examples. So that's sort of like what I look for.
Yeah, that's good. So I talked to a student earlier today who has an interview tomorrow, and I gave her the advice I often give, which is, I think I'm hearing it from you too. Don't just say what you are, tell a story that explains what you are. Don't just say, I never give up. Actually tell a story where you didn't give up, and that's going to be a lot more powerful than just self-congratulating yourself. Let's take the first question from the students.
Okay, so my question is, did you have a mentor early in your career? And if so, what's the most important thing your mentors taught you?
So Jason, I'm not sure if you're able to hear that because we only got part of that mic. So,
no, I got it.
Oh, got it.
I
okay.
got it.
I love mentors, and this was actually on my list of questions, and I saw it on the student list, and I said, perfect.
Yeah. One of the challenges you have when you start a company so early is you don't really have, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for mentors. Like my parents aren't entrepreneurial, so I didn't have that as an example. I think that the way that we solved the mentor problem is we sort of crowdsourced mentorship, whereas like we had investors who are good at particular things, and we identified like, okay, this investor is good at like getting businesses to profitability, because like one of the guys that seed funded our company, like on like it's like some kind of like dog food company or something. You know, he was like an entrepreneur, and he was really good at like unit economics and thinking through the business. And then there was someone else that, you know, was an early investor who was really good at marketing. And there was someone else who was like an advisor for actually one of the guys who ended up investing in the Series A. And he was really good at like financial analysis and could teach us all about like, here's how much detail you need in your presentation, and like, here's too much detail, and here's the point of a pitch. So people have actually asked me this mentor question a bunch of times. Like, I don't think there was any one person where I'm like, this was my mentor. I would have loved that. That would have been great and probably been super helpful. I think we just got sort of mentorship by the crowd, and we got trial by fire in our first round of starting a business, because we literally went like this, and then we got sued for $250 billion, and then we went on this roller coaster and just sort of figured it out. But I can see why people would want to have a mentor. It would have saved me a lot of headaches. My problem and maybe it's just my personality, maybe I'm just more stubborn, or I think I know the answer too much, which I think for me, it was just really important to find like, you know, okay, this person's the best in the world at X, so I'm going to take all their advice on X. And this person's the best in the world at Y. I mean, like, we have people at Uber who are like, you know, really good about thinking about the future, like people in the autonomous vehicle division. And they have all these like amazing ways about thinking about the way the world will operate in 10 years. And as an operator of a active business that has a P&L, like sometimes like I miss the 10-year vision, which is really important when you're managing a team through a lot of adversity. And so like from those people, I pull like, okay, what are they really good at? They're really good at selling the future, and how can that inspire my team today? So I think you just have to be good at like finding the best of the people around you, and sort of, taking their advice. You can also get some mentorship from books too. I mean, like, as cheesy as it is, like business books, for what they're worth, or like even like some of the like self-help books that are like, yeah, change your attitude, you'll change your work ethic, which will change the outcomes. I mean, like there's inspiration there too.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. So I remember when I first started talking to you about Back Nine Golf, you just got so excited and passionate about that business. You came out of Scour, that had a sort of a rough ending. You ended up selling it, but it was obviously not the opportunity you thought it might have been. Learned a lot. That was an early venture for you. You had trial by fire. Talk to me about why you did Back Nine Golf, and what were the lessons that you were then, does it seem like it was a very sedate, bit more of a lifestyle business. You were able to do it at your own pace, which is a hectic pace because you never do anything slow. But how did that inform the rest of your entrepreneurial journey? It's almost like you sort of step back, but your way of stepping back is creating another great little company.
Yeah. No, I like it's funny. The things that I'm like most proud of in my career are also the things. I mean, Uber, it's probably sort of celebrity status, and I'm proud of the work. But like before Uber, the things I was most proud of are the things that actually got the least press because they had the most substance. Right. Which has actually been a point of frustration because sometimes when you create something real, like no one wants to write about it. Yeah. So coming out of Scour, like we were literally on the cover. I mean, we were on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, like multiple times, the Hollywood Reporter all the time. We had like semi-celebrity status. And it just felt like very inauthentic, whatever, you know what I mean? When like people were like, oh, you're so great at business. And I'm like, yeah, but we generated some revenue. We never really got to profit. We actually never really got like this flywheel going of what the business is. So I had this real need to like actually build something from the ground up and prove that I could do that. And it wasn't just like, oh, Internet 1.0 hype and everybody got funded. Right. And so, I mean, the way I came about it was just like when we sold the company, I was basically put on a consulting contract with the company that bought it. And these transitional contracts can be fairly lucrative and they don't work you that hard, to be honest. And so I ended up playing a lot of golf. So I kind of got obsessed with it. And then I'm like, but I'm also pretty frugal. And so when I was playing golf, I'm like, oh, a new golf club's like $400. Like, that's ridiculous. It's just a piece of metal and plastic. And so I would always buy used equipment because I'm like, what's the difference if this thing's like been hit 100 times or 0 times? But I would save myself $150. And so I'm like, okay, well, one, like I bet I can get better margins on these products because like there is not a defined marketplace. So maybe I could like set the price, which is where the price book came from. Two, like I really just wanted to build a business. And three, I fell a little bit into the trap of like, oh, I should totally build a business around something that I'm really passionate about, which is golf,
Right.
which is like, directionally, like I can work out, but it's often a trap because it clouds your judgment on what's a good business. And so, I basically just said like, all right, like I'm going to create an online marketplace for used equipment. So I manually myself like went to eBay and other websites and I said, okay, what's the average price for 2,000 different golf clubs? And I spent like 3 straight days creating this like this price book, or I don't know, worked some insane amount of hours, like just proving to myself I could create a price book. And then I just started I literally walked into Roger Dunn, which might be Golf Mart up there, basically the biggest golf retailer in Southern California. And I walked in and I'm like, I can buy golf clubs. Like, do you guys have any to sell me? And they said, oh yeah, we got all kinds of excess inventory problems. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. You have excess inventory problems. And it was like super rewarding because I was there with the guy who runs a store who has to generate profit and I was buying stuff from him. So I bought like $2,000 or $3,000 worth of golf clubs, went home that day, put them on eBay and made like $1,500 in profit in like 3 days. And so I'm like, all right, well, I've invested zero, except for like 3 days of time in this price book. I've got profits already. Like there's probably something here. So that's kind of how it started. And then we got a warehouse and then it got to a certain revenue point. I mean, the market size for like used golf clubs is not, it's not a multi-billion-dollar market. But we got it to a few $1 million a year in revenue, good margins, got to the point where it was like about as big as it was going to get. And after 2 or 3 years, it was able to be run by like a general manager. I probably had the most lessons from that business. Nobody asked me about it except for you, John, because it didn't make any news.
Right.
But like I would say the number one lesson I learned how to be a salesman there, which was like my best story was I needed deals with retailers in order to get supply of golf clubs. Because that was my hard part. I was a supply constrained business, basically. And so so I needed retailers to use my price book to take inventory from their customers and then provide them store credit back. They wanted to do this because then the customer would spend more money in their store. So they liked it, but they didn't know how to sell like 2 random golf clubs in their store. Like they couldn't merchandise it, they couldn't market it.
Right.
So then they would ship it to me and I would pay them cash for it. And then I would sell it on the internet where I could basically build a website that had a more complete set of merchandise. So that's basically how the business worked. But getting retailers on the phone and getting them to do anything is super hard. So what I did was anytime I couldn't get a hold of somebody, like I would literally call them like 75 times a day, like *69, so they wouldn't know it was me, right? Like so it shows up at like private caller, so they didn't know I was calling them. I would figure out when they got into work. So like some guys would get into work at like 8:45. You'd be like, oh, I bet he's having his coffee now. You hit him at 8:47. He picks up the phone. You give him your pitch. If he's ho-hum on it, and then I can't get a hold of him again, I would actually write my sales pitch on like gift cards kind of and put it on a fruit basket. And then I would send the fruit basket to his office. And so then you would get the fruit basket. Like who the heck what crazy guys sending fruit baskets to, golf retailers trying to get them to use like a price book.
Right.
But I figured like the fruit basket costs like $30. Like the actual return on that investment was super high because like everyone called me back. And so I could either spend all my time, like I could either hire a professional salesperson at like some like ungodly amount of money that I couldn't afford, or I could call him for 6 months and never get a hold of him, or I could send him a fruit basket. It seemed like a pretty low cost way to get his attention. So fruit baskets, it's a way to close deals.
No, but I think. So I said you were passionate about it. I love talking to you about this business. I think it's the side hustle in a way. Not that this was a side business for you, but you were doing it out of that passion, and you like to solve problems, and you just described the problem to us in very articulate terms, and you went out to solve it. I wrote an article about side hustles that did pretty well, and I think it resonates with people because, like you can sort of ease your way in. You had this other gig that was a sort of a high-paying, low-demand gig, and you were able to take that excess time and not just play golf, but actually create a business in the golfing industry. So what ended up happening to that business? You had some other folks run it for a while. Did you end up selling the business or giving it to the employees, or?
No. So what happened was, so one of the issues with golf, so it ran to about, I think it was 2008 or 2009. One of the problems with that business is that in the winter, it gets kind of rough because people
Right.
don't play golf.
Right.
So in 2000, so it was very, very profitable. And then 2008 hit, and it was very unprofitable in the
Right.
winter of 2008 because of
Yep.
the financial crisis.
Sure.
I offered it to to my employees, and then I just got to the point where I had too many startups, and I just said like, all right, I'm going to wind this thing down.
Right.
So that's where it went.
Yeah, and that often happens with lifestyle businesses, right? They it plays out, it runs its course, and you move on to something else. So let's take the next student question.
Where do you believe your biggest break came from? Did this break come from your hard work, luck, or a combination of both?
Your biggest break. And did you recognize it at the time?
Yeah, I think the cliche of like the harder you work, the luckier you get, I
Right.
think is very true.
Right.
I mean, look, luck is part of the game. Like the fact that you're at UCSB, like there's some luck, right? Like, we were lucky to be born in the US, right? That allows us to do things that maybe people who are born in third world countries like can't do, or they have to work harder to do. So luck is just part of the game. I mean, the biggest break was definitely Scour. I mean, that put me on the map to like raise the money that I needed for like future businesses. It gave me the education that I need about business, like in a very, very condensed period of time where I had to get smart really, really quickly. It gave me the professional network to like leverage it. But what I would say is that like, at least the way that I think about it is if you work really hard and you're just like persistent, eventually you'll get a break. But when you get a break, you have to exploit it for all it's worth, because they don't come along very often, and it's easy to take it for granted when you do get a break.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of that learning that you got. You did the golf company, then you went to Gizmo 5, which was called SipPhone at the time. That's where you and I met. I was also at a VoIP company that we had taken public prematurely. We ended up having overtures from Google, which we did not accept, and our outcome was not great. Your outcome ended up being very good. So talk about we were both in that same space. I knew what you were going through, trying to position your company in the VoIP world. Voice over IP was hot, and then it was cold, and then it was yesterday's news, and you were able to run all the way through that to a successful exit. Talk to us in general terms about what you guys did differently, because most of those VoIP companies didn't make it.
Yeah. Good question. I think that we just never stopped, no matter what the press said, right? Like, I mean, as you look at that cycle, sure, we rode up the hype. We got a ton of users. We were in TechCrunch and got all this like, brand awareness.
Right.
And then like a year went by, and it was like, okay, no one's gonna buy us just because we're hot. Like, what's our business? And what we found was that we could actually sell calling credits, which I think is similar to CallWave's business model, which I think was that was your company.
Right.
And we said, all right, well, where are people buying those things, and what kind of margin can we make on them? And then like, what kind of cost structure can we have like as a company? And we were just very honest about like, I'd love to have 100 employees because that'd make my ego feel pretty good. But like right now, the business we have needs 15 people. And with the revenue that we have and with the margins that we have, like that's about what we need to like get as financially independent as we needed with the cash we had in the bank.
Right.
And then just continuing to like grind on those fundamentals. That kept us alive long enough. And, for Google to come along and want the amazing team that we had, and want some of the technology assets that we had. And so I think that was it. It's just like, if you just refuse to quit,
Right.
Gizmo 5 was good. I mean, it wasn't like a rocket ship, right? It was good. Like given 2 or 3 more years, we would have turned it into like a good business. Like we would have continued to do what we were doing. We would have probably gone more into business services than consumer stuff because there's more money there. But just continuing to pivot and be like intellectually honest with ourselves about where the business was, I think is what kept us in the game long enough for something good to happen.
Yep. Well, I remember you and I talked about a biz dev deal there, and we ended up just staying friends. And I think that's, I obviously saw your intelligence and problem solving skills and was impressed by that. I think for young people, that's important. That's an important lesson. As you're on this journey, there's going to be people you're going to run into in the relation. I don't think we even did a deal together. I don't remember that we ever did.
I don't remember one.
I don't think we did anything. But we enjoyed the interactions, and we saw something in each other that that we both thought made sense, and we stayed in touch. And that was probably 10 years ago or more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to take the next student question in a minute. Something else I love about your career, and I think it's so instructive for the students and for anyone watching this, is you don't have the same pattern in your career. You're not moonshot. So you had a moonshot, then you sort of did a lifestyle business, then you had kind of another moonshot with Gizmo, and then you joined a big company. You joined a public company, Taser, which we all know from the non-lethal weapons, but you joined to start a new division. So you became that ill-defined entrepreneur, someone inside a big company trying to start a new business. And the folks here might not know it, but you guys were creating, with evidence.com, that whole business that's in the news all the time now, which is the cameras, on-body cameras with policemen. So a couple things. What drew you to that entrepreneur position, different, lots of resources, but more bureaucracy? And what about the camera business? Too early when you were there? Was it just too soon?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question last. Because it actually, yeah. So on the like, why did I join? I'll give you the candid answer, which is like, I was sick and tired of raising money.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was like, after 11 years of being an entrepreneur, I still had the itch to work like that. But
right.
The startup game is rough. I mean, like, people don't realize how rough it is. And it's a lot of fun, and you learn like 100 times as fast as if you just go get a job, which is why like most of my friends are entrepreneurs, because you just go through this experience that like very few people have. And I mean, John, that's why we got along and why we've kept in touch, just because there's not a lot of people who have that background and experience to trade sort of war stories. But the reason why I was interested in it is because the pitch was, so Taser at first, I was like, well, this is ridiculous. Like, this is like a weapons company. This makes no sense. But the founder of Taser actually has a pretty interesting background. He's pretty connected to Silicon Valley, which most people don't know. And his entire pitch behind Taser was he was trying to obsolete the bullet. Now, the brand has taken on a life of its own, as we've seen. So he's not good at managing that perception. But he firmly does not believe we need bullets. He's like, you should be able to incapacitate people without killing them. And that was the spirit behind Taser. And so I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And by the way, and that's like a noble cause, and that doesn't come through. So I felt like I discovered something. So that was interesting. And then the pitch to me was, well, we know that cameras can hold people accountable, the police and the public. So instead of just putting them on our tasers, because there's actually cameras on many tasers, we want to put them on the officer. But when we put them on the officer, we don't know where that data is going to go, because police agencies are really bad at managing data. And so we're thinking of like building a cloud service. So what was fascinating to me is you're basically taking some of the country's most sensitive data, which is like the crime scene data that goes to court, that's typically only managed by these local governments or even federal governments in the case of, federal agencies, and privatizing the management of that. I was like, well, what happens when you take all of the data that comes off of a police officer for an incident, who has a camera on, who's recording multiple hours a day, and you put that all in one place? You can put analytics on top of it, like over time, like what insights can you gain from that? And like, this is super fascinating to like convince the government that they should allow a private contractor to manage their most sensitive data. So the challenge of that is, this is 2008. Before like the cloud is like obviously going everywhere. This was, I think Amazon Web Services was like maybe 2 years old at this point. So just the like, oh my God, is this even possible? Are we going to be able to convince people to do this? Was like super interesting. As far as the business, we did go through a version of the product that was not successful. The first product was monstrous. It was like this, this like camcorder on the side of your head that officers were being asked to wear. Now, we eventually got to a second version of the product. Now that business signs about $220 million in contracts a year. So it is a successful business now, very successful. It's and if you look at the value of the company, it's gone up dramatically since we built this product. Just want to call that out so it doesn't sound like it was, we were too early and it wasn't successful. But it took forever. I mean, selling to government. So let me just say one thing about entrepreneurship. And John, cut me off if I'm going too long here. I can't see people's body language, but
They're all asleep.
What's that?
They're all asleep. No, I'm kidding.
All right, cool. Well, then I'll just keep talking because it doesn't matter. One, being an entrepreneur, I was like, oh, this is going to be easy street. I'm going to pull a salary. No big deal. Like, doesn't matter. It's like twice as hard as starting a company. Like, I didn't realize this going into it.
Yep.
Like this was like a moth to a flame. Because what I walked into was a mature business that had a lot of bureaucracy, that had leadership that, needed to be revitalized. And so I got pulled into fixing like a lot of the issues with the company, as well as building this new thing, which was like wild and crazy to like, police departments. And doing that at the same time was incredibly difficult. But I learned a lot of lessons about doing that made, that's actually making my life, a bit easier here because I can see what all the problems could potentially be. Now Uber's much less bureaucratic, but, I think that's why I was attracted to it, and sort of like where we ended up with the business. It's, super successful now, 80% market share in the body camera business. Now it seems obvious that cops should wear cameras. The evolution of like trying to convince a police officer to wear a camera was like a fascinating, almost like social experiment in convincing them of that. But it just proves that if you're right and you're building products that make a difference and you're persistent about being, about the positive impact, eventually right answers do win. Most people just give up before they do.
Right, yeah. And I remember one of our Cajun Kitchen breakfasts, you telling me about this, and it just seemed to make so much sense to me. Like, of course we would want, and this is probably in 08, I don't even remember, 09. Of course we would want that information, both from the perpetrator and the officer's standpoint. And what I was alluding to on Too Early was it just took longer than everyone thought. But it is a very, very, and I think it's doing great work, right? It's helping citizens and it's helping police as well. I am going to go to another student's question.
Do you feel there's a significant difference in culture between Uber and your former position at Taser?
So you sort of touched upon that. So let me expand on that a little bit. So oftentimes you learn by seeing things maybe you don't want to replicate in another business, and I don't want you to be down on either company. But maybe what are some of the things that you were able to take out of the Taser cultural experience and see change at Uber?
Yeah. So I think, look, like when I left Taser, it was actually a pretty awesome place to work. I think all that was good. On the lessons learned, number one lesson learned is businesses, products, anything that you want to get done has to roll up to one person. When you have duplicate owners of a single initiative, oh my God, it takes forever to get it done because you have to build consensus and all this stuff. Now, at the point of like massive, if you're a Procter & Gamble, sure, you're trying to protect the business and maybe those checks and balances make sense. But if you're just trying to get something going, like when I came into Uber, and because I've known Travis, he was like, and he's a big believer in this. He's like, look, you're going to do special projects. That was initially my job and title, but you own it. Like, you're going to have your own team. You're not going to matrix into the organization. Like, it's got to be all on you. And that's how we're going to make quick progress on this, because you can't be held up by a business that's at a different stage with different processes, different culture, like all these things. And so if you want to make quick decisions fast and you want to preserve your own sanity as an entrepreneur, you have to be the one calling the shots. It's got to be, like business has to live or die based on you. So setting yourself up in that way, going into opportunities, is super important.
So Jason, Uber is known for many things, but one is just the way they just nailed the two-sided market. And I'm sure inside it was difficult and messy, but on the outside it looked pretty elegant, pretty well orchestrated. You are obviously going after a lot of two-sided markets as well with Uber Rush and Uber Eats and other solutions you're rolling out there. Do you have any pointers for I get a lot of students that want to start a two-sided market, and I usually tell them don't do it because it's so difficult to pull it off. What are some of the ways that you guys do it? You're obviously working from a point of advantage now, but it's still not a foregone conclusion that these things are going to be successful.
Yeah, so Eats is actually even more complicated. It's a three-sided marketplace because you have eaters, couriers, and restaurants. And so you have to balance incentives across all of those things. I mean, look, like the reason why, I mean, it sounds cliche to say, but when you meet the people you meet the first few hundred people at Uber, it's obvious why we were successful. Like balancing this marketplace is just, it requires an incredible amount of operations expertise, which like Uber was built quite a bit different than most tech companies. Like the operations team was bigger and more influential, especially in early days, than the engineering team or the tech teams, because they were the ones. I mean, like we had people in cities, like literally walking up to taxi drivers, being like, "Hey, man, there's a better way," and walking into limo companies, signing up, limos like one by one by one by one, and like from the outside, it's like, "Oh, there's a car on a map," and I hailed it. Right. There was literally like operations. I mean, there were literally like 24-year-olds from like Stanford going door to door, like lobbying taxi companies, or lobbying taxi drivers to drive for themselves. And that's actually how it started. It was just all grit. There was there was magic there, but like the grit is what created the balance.
Right.
As far as starting a marketplace company, I mean, I think it's like, I always think that's kind of like an interesting like place to start, which is like why do you want to start a marketplace? Like, I mean, a marketplace is usually a solution to a problem, not necessarily like the starting point, right? Like Uber is a marketplace because if it wasn't a marketplace, it wouldn't be as reliable. Like the cost wouldn't be as low. It wouldn't be as resilient. So there's a lot of things that the marketplace model benefits for the business. And so, but marketplaces are hard. Balancing both sides it's not trivial, and it's usually a lot of grind. Like, I mean, like I had lunch with one of the guys who was early at StubHub, right. And if you hear the early days, it's like years and years and years of like them showing up outside Dodger Stadium, like the founders, like being like, "No, there's a different way to buy tickets," and like eventually the compounded growth rate of like 1.5% a week started to mean something, and it turned into this like huge success. Right. But they take a long time to get going and require a lot of determination.
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's being able to survive long enough to see that determination through. So Travis did a good job of raising money he had a couple successful companies before Uber, a couple successful experiences, and persevered in raising that money. Because it wasn't easy to raise money for that venture at the beginning, as you well know. It was so different. It was an Airbnb type company that was so different. Most people just shook their heads and said, "I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, that does not make sense to me." Let's take one more student question. Yeah.
As a consumer and frequent user of Uber, it seems as though Uber and Lyft emerged around the same time, but Uber seems to have become a lot more successful and quickly became the industry leader in ride-sharing apps. What do you attribute to Uber's success over Lyft, and why?
I'm not sure I can answer all that question. There's probably some trade secrets in there. Let's see, what can I say? So I think businesses, and I think I said it before, and I'm really not trying to dodge the question. Businesses are the people, and when you look at the growth rates of Uber in the early days, it was really steep. And so if you think about the challenges of like keeping a marketplace healthy that's growing like this, that means you need to go get drivers really, really fast. And the company didn't have time to go figure out like, oh, what's the right algorithm or the right paid marketing strategy to go get drivers? It was like, whoa, okay, take a bunch of smart ops people, push them into the field, and just go make it happen. And I think if you looked at like Lyft's driver supply situation in early days, it probably wasn't as healthy as Uber's, just because Uber was like very aggressive on like getting drivers on the road because it saw the potential. I think Uber raised money to like further spur like city expansion, right? If you look at Uber city expansion over time, it's much faster than Lyft's. And I think, look, like the people here are just competitors. And so, is Lyft in Santa Barbara?
No, it was one of the founders was a Gaucho UCSB student.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
But we all love Uber.
Yeah, I mean, like we just went to places that they didn't go, and I think that being being in more places allows people to use your product more. So like, for example, if you were to fly to New York right now, well, I shouldn't say this. I don't know if Lyft is operating there right now or not, but like for many years they were not. If they are now, I might just be disconnected because I deliver food all day. But if you're from LA and you got to go to New York and there's Uber in LA and Uber in New York, but there's Lyft in LA, but not in New York, like, I'm just going to use the Uber thing, right? So I think that's what I can say.
Jason, how much of your time, if any, do you have to spend reminding your folks to just ignore a bunch of the press? Because you guys are clearly a company people like to write about, and they're going to write good things and bad things, true things and untrue things. For a while there was a rash of articles about Uber's business model is broken, they're going to go out of business. And do you even have to talk about that at work, or do people just say, hey, that makes us stronger, we don't care, and people just fight through it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a mix. I mean, I think that if you've been around Uber for a while, you're used to it. I think if you're new to Uber, you might get a little more shaken.
Right.
I think that from the top down here, like, we think very inside out about problems. Like, okay, that's what they said. I mean, we have our numbers. We see what's going on.
Right,
Are we worried based on what's actually going on or because of what they said? And it's often the case that what's going on is really good. I mean, yes, we're investing super heavily, that's sort of public knowledge. I think you're always battling that, but like, I think culturally, at least on my team, like my attitude is like, yeah, I mean, if you want to get your self-esteem from the press, you're going to have a very tough life.
Right.
So let's just focus on building something really great that our customers care about. And like, let's get upset whenever our customer NPS drops. Let's not get upset whenever our, whatever's reported in the press is not what we want to hear.
Right.
Because negative stories get clicks. Reporters are in the business of selling ads. So the more clicks they get, the more ads they sell. Yes, there are really good journalists out there that write, articles of substance, but most of this stuff is clickbait.
Yep, I would agree with that. I will take the last student question, and then I have a question to end things with.
Having been president of 3 companies, what skills not taught in a classroom would you say are most essential for success in such a role?
So a couple skills that you did not learn in the classroom that were helpful as a leader of companies.
I didn't learn any skills in a classroom that was useful as a leader of a company.
You didn't take this class.
I mean, I was a computer science major with basically a film and English minor. So like, I wasn't taking economics classes or business classes or any of these things. I think you can, I'm sure you can learn lots of skills like, in these classrooms. But I think let's see, how would I phrase it? This is probably awkward in front of a class of people and with a professor present, but I think business is one of those things that's actually pretty simple, but people make it complicated, right? The lessons you learn about leadership and management, all that stuff is super useful. But at the end of the day, you have to start with, am I adding value to my customer? And then what's the value that I'm adding? And is that enough for me to run my business? And then the question is, can you prove that out and make it repeatable? Can you get people excited about it? Are you excited about it? I think, what I found from a leadership standpoint is if you're excited, your team is excited. And if you're not excited and you're going back to a book to figure out how to manage and lead your team,
right.
It's just not going to come across right. Now, if you're excited, but you're just bouncing off the walls, maybe you need some reining in on no, you need to have weekly meetings with your team. You need to talk about people development. People want to move up on your team. They need to have their skills honed, all those things. I think it starts with the sort of raw material, your interest in it. And then what you can learn is how to funnel that and direct that. So I think that's how it's useful.
Yep, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of things students can learn from you. One of the things that strikes me is you just got out there and started solving problems. You didn't go to a textbook. You didn't go to a professor and ask a bunch of questions. You saw problems and you just started. I get that question a lot in office hours. John, how do I start? It's very simple. Just start. Think about how you did the golf company. You just got online, created a website, went to a golf store, bought some golf clubs, sold them online, and said, wow, there's actually a business here. Instead of writing a 15-page business plan of theoretical nonsense. So I think that's something we can all take away. So I have a bit of a student's question. I'm going to morph it a little bit. I think it's a good one to end on. So you're in a really interesting situation. You joked about, I'm delivering food all day. Clearly, Uber Eats is a big piece of the business, Rush, Essentials, et cetera. How much of your business, or how much of your time, I should say, do you get to spend thinking about what's next and really contemplating that in a thoughtful way? And then what are some, and I know you can't show us all your cards, but what are some facets of society that you think, 5+ years out, we're going to be impacted by what Uber's built today?
Yeah. So, I mean, how much of my time do I get to spend thinking on future stuff? I'm spending more now. So a little bit of history is we launched what is the current version of Uber Eats in December of last year. We're now in 41 markets. We launched like Tokyo and Amsterdam and Dubai and Mexico City and all these places. So I spent a lot of my time executing on that. I think the future of software's relationship with the physical world, like we're in dial-up days right now.
Right.
Like meaning like we're at the very beginning. Like I remember when I had a dial-up connection, I'm like, what would I need broadband for? And now it's like, oh, of course, right? So I think that, look, autonomous vehicles are coming.
Right.
We're investing heavily, Google's investing heavily, like Ford has signaled. That's going to be really fascinating because it's not just going to be, I'm probably teetering on like whatever these like PR approved notes are about like what I'm supposed to say here. But like that's going to be really fascinating because kind of like with smartphones, I think when the iPhone came out, I was like, oh, look, it's a better phone. It's it's much nicer and more beautiful. And like, I have a calendar here that I can actually read. But like the actual impact was like far greater than that. And it was even hard to imagine. So when you think about things like autonomy, like imagine when you just give people time back in their day to like do stuff. They can work in a car, right? Like at the sort of simplest version of it. You can provide really low cost access of transportation to people that might spend 2.5 hours a day on a bus. Like imagine a world where transportation is so cheap and so reliable that like someone who cannot afford a private car and UberX to like get to work and has to take a bus or like have multiple stops and they can't spend time with their family. Like what happens whenever a ride that's more or less directly to where they need to go is the same price as a bus pass? Like that completely changes the way that person lives their life, despite the fact they previously couldn't afford it. So I think that, as software starts to make our interactions with the physical world more frictionless and hopefully lower cost, we won't be successful if we don't do that. I think you're gonna, the chores of your day, the things that are high friction now that, if you grew up with it, you take for granted, are going to start going away.
Wow. Well, we look forward to all of those things. I want more time in my day, so I'm looking forward to that. And we really, really appreciate that you took the time to share your insights with us. Thank you.
Yeah, really good pleasure.